Welcome to Cinemafile, where we showcase the best in independent documentary and foreign filmmakers and talk to them about their work. I'm your host, Mike Kaspar. You can listen to other interviews by going to Cinemafile with Mike Kaspar at Spotify. Emmy Award-winning director Andrew Goldberg's latest documentary film, White with Fear, sheds light on the decades-long strategy of politicians and media outlets to amplify racial divisions and white victimization narratives for power and for profit. Let's leave it there. There's a lot to talk about in this very, very well done documentary film that gives us a wonderful overview of our political landscape over the last many decades, going back to Richard Nixon up to today, and why it matters and how it matters, and who are we electing now in reaction to all of these different fears. We're joined again today by the director of White with Fear, Andrew Goldberg. Andrew, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Was there a particular moment over the last few years where you felt that this was an area that needed to be explored in more detail? What inspired you to make White with Fear?
I think that, after the George Floyd murder and the sort of public conversation that got started around Black Lives Matter, everyone's at home and we're watching TV and we're all sort of participating in this new reality, which is that we're not meeting in person anymore. We're sort of trapped in front of our screens. And everybody started thinking about and talking about and engaging with race and racism in America in a way that I had not seen before. And I think that the visuals of George Floyd played a role in that. And I think that the protests that then followed was interesting because it was sort of like the first time everyone was getting out in a certain sense. You see these huge crowds of people that have not sort of been in the vicinity of another person in a while. But in any event, this conversation has started around whiteness and what does being white mean and white privilege. And I wanted to do something about the white experience. I didn't know what to do. I talked to PBS originally about a show about whiteness or white privilege or what have you. And all I could figure out was that nobody agreed on anything. There was just an endless argument about what it meant to be white, about whether or not race is even a real thing, about what whiteness means, about what white privilege is. But one thing I could find some consistency on was that white people were being manipulated. That one was easy, and I thought factual, it gave me a way to look at sort of the white American experience as it relates to racism in a much more narrow view. And so that's what we honed in on, basically strategic racism and how it manipulates white people to what I would say are cynical ends or a cynical motivation to a self-centered end for those who are doing it. And that's how we came up with this idea, manipulating white people by scaring them, White with Fear. And of course, the title has a couple of different meanings depending on how you read it.
What I appreciate about you getting to what I consider to be the heart of the story is your focus not only on the politics of fear that has been stoked by, I'll call conservative, I'll call Republicans for a long, long time, but also something that's been of very much of interest to me over the last many years is the echo chamber that has been built up over several decades of investment in media. And I like that you bring that into the conversation pretty quickly into the telling of this and how important that has been in exaggerating, or will you tell me what you think it's done over the course of these many decades?
I had a conversation once with George Will, who's a conservative writer, and he's certainly not a Trumper, but he's a very conservative guy. If you were to go back to the 80s and look around, you would not find a conservative infrastructure in America. There are a lot of groups, organizations, media outlets, think tanks, educational spaces that exist that support conservative ideas that were non-existent. In the way George Wills put it, he said something along the lines, and if he hears this, I don't want him to quote me, but, we looked around and we thought, they have the corporate boardrooms, they have the media, they've got, a lot of politicians, they've got a lot of financiers. What do we have? And they went and set out and made places like the Heritage Foundation and Fox News. And now you have, other TV and radio outlets, the rise of Rush Limbaugh was a huge part of that, right? I mean, Rush Limbaugh becomes a kind of a clearinghouse in a way that I think conservative thinkers and spokes conservative voices had never had before. There was just nothing like that. The trend was always toward liberalism in terms of social movements in this country, right? America has not gotten more conservative over time. It's gotten more liberal and more progressive. The rise of the Civil Rights Movement, the Voting Act or Voting Rights Act, all of these things are, to the conservative mind, a movement in the wrong direction. And so the conservative powers recognized this and wisely, to their credit, started all these groups. Think about the incredible power that Fox News wields in this country. It's unbelievable. There's no democratic equivalent. One could argue that the media as a whole has a democratic slant, and it probably does, but there's no single institution with the horsepower of Fox News. And now you have places like Newsmax and all sorts of, I mean, the entire AM radio ecosphere is dominated by conservative voices. And that's a really powerful, remarkable thing that now has been sort of, weaponized in a way to convey a lot of ideas that are conservative and perhaps reasonable, but also radical and dangerous, like the ones that terrify white people that they're unsafe. And therefore, that the only thing they can do is vote for a particular candidate. Otherwise, they're going to get murdered in their bed. And that's the fear level that we're dealing with.
And what you're describing could lead to a much longer discussion about that. And I would point to the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine as a turning point in the rise of right-wing media. Up to that point, there was an obligation, if you were to retain your license, to present differing points of view, a balanced approach to your editorial content. And that when that went away, that was within a year or so after that is the rise of Rush Limbaugh. So I think there's a direct correlation there.
Well, I mean, I think the people that made Rush Limbaugh will tell you they will agree with you. The other part of it now, of course, is that cable TV is largely unregulated the way the federal airwaves are. They see what the potential can be now. I mean, Rush Limbaugh would not have existed prior to that, could not have existed prior to that. Well, even if he could have, even if somebody could have found a way to do that, it just didn't seem, it just wasn't the way people thought. That opened a lot of doors for people, and then of course you get to it now, and it's on the internet, which is completely unregulated.
Right.
The other part I'll just point out is that people now are dominated by their feed. What they get, what gets curated for them in their internet feeds, whether it's Instagram or Facebook or what have you, and for some people that's their entire source of information. And so we live in different worlds. I mean, literally different planets. They never see the news that we see, or I never see the news that they see, depending on who I'm talking to.
Right. You're right. This is an entire ecosystem from morning till all 24 hours a day, as you described it. And the other thing that I don't think it's pointed out enough, but when Fox News was under pressure on these lawsuits over the voting machines, they're quick to point out that they're not a news. They're especially their primetime hosts are not news people. They're opinion makers. And so that's another thing about all of this stuff. These people are fact-free because it's just their opinion, and that's how you're able to kind of hide behind this veneer of being some kind of reputable news person, when in fact you really aren't being held to any kind of a standard that you would if you were a Walter Cronkite or Huntley Brinkley, or name anyone from the 60s and 70s who were on the air giving us what we assume to be a fairly balanced approach to the news.
I would say it was a fairly balanced approach to the news, but as someone like as someone, but in my work, working on this film, we watched a ton of newscasts back from the 60s and 70s, and there was plenty of opinion seeping through. I'm always careful to hold them up with too high regard, but I do think that there was a system in place of gatekeepers, right? Like, by and large, your news was curated by smart people whose job it was to think about what was the best thing to report. That phrase that the New York Times uses, all the news that's fit to print, somebody was deciding what was fit and still does. Those smart people don't exist on many of these other sort of platforms, and they just spew nonsense. The stuff that for example, Tucker Carlson is saying, I mean, outright, overt, explicitly bigoted commentary, and he was given a major primetime platform to do that for many years. Now he does it, and of course he does it on his own. But he had the sanctioning of Fox News, who also, has the word news in their title and who has the phrase "we report, you decide," as if there's some sort of, impartial thinking going on there when it isn't the case,
Yeah.
at all. So, and one thing we try to cover in our film, White with Fear, by the way, which drops on Amazon on today, which is June 3rd, but for anyone hearing this later, please check it out. Amazon and Apple and all the streaming services, is that this is big business, right? This is money. It isn't as if news by ideologues. It's not as if the news organizations that are out there, they're not even news organizations. The information organizations are giving you news because they believe in it. They're giving it to you because it's profitable. They can sell ad space on it and subscriber fees and what have you. And it's all about the money, big money. There's some phrase that they print money at Fox News. That's something that people have said. Uh, I think that's an interesting idea that manipulating people and damaging society benefits a small group of people who make literally millions, if not billions of dollars doing it.
And just to be fair, if you will, fair and balanced, if you will, that there's an audience for it. And this is really the heart of the film for me, that not only do we have news organizations that, in some manner of speaking, and this is sort of akin to what you were talking about earlier, the feed that I get from my YouTube channel that I watch, or whatever I'm getting from whatever platform it might be, is that it's telling me what I either want to hear or I think I want to know. Though that's kind of the genius of all of this. What Fox News, I'm sure, does endless surveys of their audience to determine what do they want to hear? What is it that they're interested in? And that's a good business model, but it's also not necessarily a good thing for a functional democracy. And I think that's the heart of this film.
Well, that's the point is that, there's no sense of responsibility, personal responsibility by the people that run that network. Or listen, I can't say there's none. That would be dishonest. I'm sure there are some people there who care quite a bit. It's not like I can demonize everybody who works there because I don't know them. I can just say that, what winds up on the air, I think is doing a lot of damage to our democracy. I think it's irresponsible programming. And I'm a big free speech guy. I think the solution most of the time, let's say almost all of the time, to so one set of speech is another set of speech, more speech. We should be able to debate things through and talk them through. But there's sort of a limit to that stuff when it leads to what I think is potentially the end of our democratic institutions. I don't know where that line is. I mean, it's not like I'm in favor of taking people off the air. I don't like what I'm seeing. Right? It's very, very scary. I mean, I can also say that it happens on the left. I mean, I think that I think a lot let's take an example like Israel. Israel's an example where we should have a healthy debate about what is going on in that country. Let's not you or me get into opinions about that in this conversation, but we should have a healthy debate about it. It's getting to the point now where that debate has gone into a point where people are taking guns and shooting people, like they did, or lighting people on fire. That shooting people and lighting people on fire within a week of each other, that means we've gone too far. And that's a place where we as a collection of media professionals need to think about what we're putting out there. And to me, as irresponsible as Fox is, I feel that Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and blue, whatever blue, I don't even know. I'm not on it.
Blue sky is the other.
Sky, and all of these are almost much bigger offenders because they have much bigger audiences and they command your attention for huge periods of time every day. And there it is. They're hitting you all day long. It's almost like drugs, and they're completely irresponsible about what they do. These are private companies that choose to be completely reckless in their choice of what they deliver to people's heads.
Well, I agree. I agree with what you're saying, and I want to but quickly remind our listeners that we're speaking with Andrew Goldberg. He's the director of the documentary film White with Fear. It comes out today, June 3rd. So if you're listening to this conversation, you can go to the website whitewithfear.com, or as you were talking about, I think all the major platforms, as I call them, the usual suspects, you'd be able to watch it online. Again, going back to, we do feel like we're the snake that's eating our tail in some ways right now, and it's in service to mostly to profit. But one of the great things about this film is to kind of go back and do the forensics on how we got here. There was a time when there were adults in the room among our political class that knew there was a bridge too far, that there were things that shouldn't be said out loud. And what I would just interject here is that the ascension of Trump became the ascension of America's id. And to me, Donald Trump is America's id. There's no ego or superego with him. It's all about saying the quiet part out loud. And that's how he got where he is. And it's been successful, and he's not going to stop.
I agree with you. I think Trump took the dog whistle, as Rick Perlstein says in the film, and turned it into a train whistle. But he still follows a series of rules. For example, he doesn't use explicit, overt racial slurs. He doesn't use the N word. He still acts as though he cares about the best interests of people of color. In a perverse way, in a couple of very narrow cases, he does, he'll talk about, that he wants this for Black Americans, or this for any other, class of or community. He'll sort of speak about their well-being because he's trying to maintain this idea that he isn't a bigot. I don't think that. I mean, it'd be interesting to have a conversation with someone like George Wallace. Okay, so George Wallace is a political operative from the, what is he, the late 50s, early 60s, and there's a phrase that his chief strategist uses, which I can't say out loud, but he uses the N word, and he says that he lost an election because the other candidate out N-worded him. In other words, the other candidate was more of a racist than he had been, and that if he was not going to let that candidate out N-word him again. In other words, the next time he ran, he was going to be a bigger racist. Now, his political strategist said this in a documentary. This wasn't a secret. In other words, being a racist back then was celebrated by some people. So we are in a different world where Trump has to act like he's not a racist. I'd be interested to know, just out of as an experiment, how much of a racist he really is deep down inside. I think he's a bit of a racist and a bigot and an anti-Semite, but I don't think he wants to put Jews in gas chambers, and I don't think he wants to put Black people in chains. I think he's an opportunist and an exploitative one at that, who's just a sort of, garden variety racist bigot, which is pretty appalling. The trouble is that when you bring that to the power that he has, you destroy whole communities and you destroy our whole democratic system. It's such a dangerous series of mechanisms when they're unleashed. And he has, as you put it, adults in the room. He has none of that. And he has no adults around him. They're encouraging him. I mean, Stephen Miller, my God, the guy's obsession with immigration is terrifying. It's terrifying to listen to that guy talk, and to talk to people that knew him growing up. Can't believe the stuff that came out of his mouth, according to the people that I spoke to.
Well, I won't get into all the examples of why I think Donald Trump is a racist, but I will say more important than that, and that is that he's completely transactional. And he's also someone of a class that very rarely interacted with a lot of working class African Americans. So those two, I think that's the combination that makes the most sense to me. He is completely transactional, and he saw running for president to get back at Barack Obama for the comments he made at the Correspondents' Dinner, his ego, and an opportunity to essentially rebrand himself as the America's billionaire. And I don't think he ever thought he was going to win until the end in 2016. So all of these things kind of, in some crazy way, have all crashed in together to my mind. And this is what we have, this sort of toxic brew of a malignant narcissist in the White House surrounded by bigots. I think that's a correct assessment.
I agree. I mean, with a lot of what you say, and I mean, I'd have to parse each thing to think, that I agree with that and that? But by and large, I think your point is wise and cogent. My thing though is that the whether or not Trump is a racist or bigot is almost secondary, because he's doing racist and bigoted things. I have no doubt that there have been people in political office before who have been bigger bigots than Trump who didn't act like bigots. But what I try to point out in the film is that they can sit down in a room, and whether or not they're racist, whether or not they feel that way, they use it as part of their political strategy to get elected. And this is what the film shows, that people like Richard Nixon, whether it's Richard Nixon or Mitt Romney or Ronald Reagan or George Bush or George Bush's son, whomever, or Trump now, that they know that by leaning into racial dog whistling will win them the election. The trouble is that you do that and you hurt our society. I think that the deep racism that is spread across the American population is somewhat avoidable. Republican politicians have spent 55 years exploiting racial differences, scaring white people about people of color. And as a result, those fears now that were existed in people's minds, maybe that were, a 2 on a scale of 1 to 10, are now an 8 because people have been pouring Miracle Grow on them for 55 years. That's a scary idea. And so now you've got a population of people that are screaming racial comments that are downright, bloody. They're calling for things in the worst, most terrifying ways that they didn't need to be. Imagine if we'd spent the last 50 years healing America rather than dividing. It's intentional. And this is something that it isn't really a matter of opinion. I mean, if you watch our film, you will literally hear the operatives that worked on this telling you what they did. Whether it's Jesse Helms's campaign manager who ran the famous Hands ad where the guy says you lost that job because it went to a minority, or if it's, Steve Bannon himself, who I interviewed, who tells me all about how he went after white voters and what he had to do that.
That's another thing about the film that I have been thinking about. I thought, am I the only one who thinks this is what happened? But in this last election cycle, when Trump won in 2024, it felt like there were people voting that don't vote, that haven't voted before. And I think this was part of it, part of the outreach of the evangelical community into communities where voter turnout among whites is traditionally very low. And I do think that that made a huge difference in him carrying the swing states. There were people, as is talked about in the film,
John Trendy.
Trendy, pardon me, John Trendy. And I think he's absolutely spot on. People who are low propensity voters, I'll call them the low information voters. I don't want to degrade them, but low propensity voters turned out this election cycle. And I think they were the difference.
Well, we talk about that in the film. What will get a person to who doesn't ordinarily want to get out of their house and go vote? Voting to someone like me feels very normal. It's just sort of something that I do. But voting for some people just feels like some strange things that other people do. Why would I ever bother to go register to vote, go sign up, go wait in line somewhere? It almost feels strange. And those are people that are going to respond to, especially in the white community, those are people that the research showed, according to Sean Trendy, I think it was research, whatever he came up with his study, showed that you can bring those people to the polls if you have the right campaign strategy. And in this case, the campaign strategy, that Sean talked about was an America First strategy, which ties right into what Trump does and what Steve Bannon did. Steve Bannon read this Sean Trendy work called The Missing White Voter, and he used this missing white voter strategy, particularly on issues of immigration, and that got people up and out.
Yeah.
And this was something that I don't know if Sean thought about it. Actually, Sean probably did. Sean's a very smart guy. Thought about was that this was how a candidate named Barry Goldwater got the political parties in 7 states to switch from Democrat to Republican. He did it on the basis of race. These were 7 states that had historically voted Democrat. Now, at the time, voting Democrat was the more racist party, if you will. The parties switched. They flipped what's interesting to them. It used to be if you wanted to be more of a racist and feel more at home, you'd be a Democrat. That's not the case now. Now it's the other way around. But back then, Barry Goldwater ran as a Republican. He wanted to win. So he went to 7 southern states, mind you. And he's told them that minorities run this country. And he told them that the civil rights movement was bad. And they responded. He flipped 7 states from Democrat to Republican by appealing to them on the basis of racial fear mongering. And that's exactly what they've been doing ever since. Barry Goldwater set the template without even realizing it.
There's some great people in the film. Kevin Phillips is one who was the architect, if you will, the godfather of the Southern strategy, which, in a manner of speaking, is just really following up on what you're talking about with Barry Goldwater, but really kind of weaponizing it to a much greater degree. There's a lot of really interesting people in the film. There's a lot of people whose voices are not generally heard that I haven't heard before, and to see them in the film, the way that they talk about. I like the fact that you got Carl Cameron, who was a former Fox News reporter, who was on the inside of all of this, and so we get that perspective. There is a lot going on in this film. At the end of the day, it is about people who look like me and you. How are we going to react to the future? What are the politics of this country going to look like moving forward if we can't start to get past a lot of this fear mongering?
It's unfortunate, and I don't see any end in sight. I mean, they found the formula and it works. By appealing to people on the basis of race, they're going to continue to win elections. That is something that we should all be concerned about. I don't think that manipulating people around irrational fears is the solution. And the other part, people say to me, well, wait a minute, Andrew, are you suggesting that everything they're saying is a lie? Absolutely not. Immigration is a problem, but it doesn't need to be fixed by terrifying white people and telling them that their kids are going to get their eyes bashed out with a hammer. You don't need to respond to crime that may or may not be higher in certain black communities by terrifying people about people of color, about black people. I mean, what you have is something where you have a situation that deserves a frank conversation. They take the worst of that and amplify it on, to level 10 with the dramatic music playing and the shrieking and the screaming and the yelling, the screaming fire in a crowded theater, and everybody freaks out. That's not how to run our politics, but that's the way that works and how they win elections, and I don't see them stopping anytime soon.
Well, thank you for White with Fear. Thank you for the work, for all the different voices. As I said, there's so much in this documentary film that I think people can hopefully talk about, at least move past the sort of yelling and screaming and the sloganeering and all the rest of it, and get to a conversation about what do we want America to look like? How do we want to conduct our elections? How, and in the future, and we need to make our democracy stronger, and we don't need to weaken it anymore. And that's what I feel like we're in the midst of right now. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope people will check it out, though. We are on all the streaming services, Amazon and Apple, etc. And it's called White with Fear. And there's also our website, whitewithfear.com, if they want to learn more. We've got a 93% positive rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which is pretty good. Everybody loves the film. So we're very excited and have had a great run with it so far.
And again, all the different voices, we hear there are a wide range of voices here. You mentioned Steve Bannon, and there are others. What's it, Sam Nunberg, who's also.
Sure, Sam Nunberg, who came up with the idea to build a wall and that Mexico should pay for that wall. We've got Rick Gates, who worked on the Trump campaign, who tells us what happened inside.
Yeah.
Same with, we interviewed Steve Bannon. I interviewed Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
And many, many, many more people. It's a really revelatory film because you've never heard these people talk about this stuff before, and they all open up for it. So,
Well, from an accomplished award-winning filmmaker, so thank you for your work, and thank you again for this film, White with Fear, director Andrew Goldberg. Thank you.
appreciate it. Thank you.
You have been listening to Cinemafile. I'm your host, Mike Kaspar, and you can listen to previous interviews as well as special programming, or you can subscribe by going to Cinemafile, that's File, with Mike Kaspar, at Spotify. Until next time, thank you for listening.